Well, photography for me came by way of an accident because I did grow up in an appalling background where the only way you dealt with life was with your fist, and you couldn't always win, and often you had a rather painful jaw to remind you that it's not always the biggest win. So you feel you couldn't go on living like that, and there seemed to be no way out. So to grow up in a place like that, you were a totally no-hoper. And so what was the way out, For me, I did national service. I was luckily sent to a photographic section, a unit. I was in the Middle East, and I started brushing up against people who did photography. That was part of their job in the Air Force. But sadly, because I couldn't read very well, I failed the trade test and never came out of the Air Force as a qualified photographer. But at least I started to touch photography. And likewise, it came back to me, and I went back to the so-called ghetto where I grew up, at a place called Finsbury Park in North London. And the danger was still there of me slipping back and hanging out with those boys who, the violence and, I suppose I would have become a criminal, really, if I hadn't have discovered photography. It was my salvation, really. It was very difficult in those days not to grow up without acquiring a criminal record, because we hated the police, we hated all forms of restrictions, authoritarian kind of people trying to crush us, and we were the kind of people who thought we couldn't be crushed. It's a really good attitude to have, really, because it means you're not going to go down unless you go down and become a habitual criminal. I think my background is the very best possible background I could have had. It made me tough. It made me resilient. It made me there was an anger, a chip on my shoulder, huge, There was a huge problem of inferiority complex socially. One should have had an anger against the middle class, the upper class. The structure of the social classes in England, other countries wouldn't understand it. It's now been separated now by those who've got the money and those who haven't. It doesn't matter about the titles anymore. So a lot of that's changed. But I always really felt happy because of, going back to the underprivileged. And I felt that I could photograph amongst them quite easily, because it was just due to the fact that I had the knowledge of what it's like to be poor. I'm a very complex person. I mean, I'd get on the subway in the morning to go to work in Mayfair, and I'd be aware of the fact that we didn't have a bath in my house, and I used to bath once a week. And in the summer, we'd go into the garden, and my mother, with a cigarette hanging in her mouth, would stick a hose pipe out of the window and hose me down. But I used to be terribly aware of going on the Piccadilly line to work every day, thinking or possibly knowing there was a slight body odour that, I was carrying Finsbury Park to Mayfair. I never forget those days. So no one's going to catch me out, And I have risked my life time and time again to improve my life standards and my lifestyle and things. So I don't believe I'm stealing from this society over and above anybody else. But, I'm a man who reflects on the past and whatever future I've got left. I'm never going to surrender my humble beginnings. Studying the work of other photographers was the only way forward for me. I mean, how would I know what photography meant? We didn't use the word the art world in those days in photography. It was never associated with art photography. It seems to have, become so today, but still not in my case. I don't buy that art world photography stuff. But yes, I did study the work of Bill Brandt. He was one of my earlier people, and I actually met Bill. He was a very nice man. One of my true heroes in photography was always Alfred Stieglitz. And then I moved on to Frederick Evans, Alvin Langdon Coburn, and there was another crazy guy called Fred Hollanday. These are the people, and Peter Emerson, who did the Norfolk Broads, and people of that caliber. And, my life has been much more interesting delving back into the world of those photographers, the pioneers, I can honestly say I'm self-taught, because I bought books on photography, and I looked. I didn't read. I looked. I acquired photography by looking.